The very origins of the word democracy, from ancient Greek, demos kratos, literally means people power. So why then did the Washington Post choose such an eye-opening slogan as the subtitle of their publication? Is this a direct jab at President Donald Trump's hatred of the media, whom he sees as the arch-enemy of the American people? Or is it in fact a double-edged sword, and is reflecting on Trump's notion of giving America back to the people, which is essentially demos kratos, people power?
When the media lies to people, I will never, ever let them get away with it. I will do whatever I can that they don't get away with it. They have their own agenda, and their agenda is not your agenda.
In times where social media makes everyone a journalist, Trump is in a sticky situation as potentially everyone with a Twitter account or blog becomes an enemy. So this raises the question as to who exactly Trump is setting his sights on. Is he aiming to shake up the establishment, including the media, and whether or not the media really are the enemy? Since as far back as print goes, the media and politics have gone hand in hand. The fact that certain democracies are essentially a media-elected government means that Trump's miraculous presidential victory was in part thanks to the media. After all, his Twitter comments boosted his celebrity status beyond compare, and the media lapped it up.
I think he's simply interested in playing to his base, and that means continuing to antagonize the news media generally. By the way, he has perhaps contradictorily said that he's not against the news media per se. He doesn't consider the news media per se his enemy, but only those news media who have misrepresented the stories as he understands it. So in that way, I think he's at least making some minimal effort to distinguish within the news media between those who are good and those who are bad.
There's a saying in the media that any publicity is good publicity, and this hammers home the point with Trump, that whether or not his hatred of the media is just a tactic used to get any sort of attention.
The press has become so dishonest that if we don't talk about it, we are doing a tremendous disservice to the American people.
But the Washington Post's new slogan brings with it mixed reviews, with many raising the question that it insults democratic ideals and is just unacceptable. Will Trump now continue his ping-pong battle with the press and use this slogan to his advantage? The Washington Post say that the slogan is an old one, and that in fact it is aimed at conveying a point to the many millions of readers who have joined them in the last year. This has been further highlighted by the paper's veteran reporter, Bob Woodward, who has long been heard saying that democracy dies in darkness.
The judge who said it got it right about letting secret government persist or continue and even grow, and that is that democracies die in darkness.
One thing that all democracies should thrive on is freedom and choice. Headlines, stories, articles, the media, all provide an opinion, and then it becomes a free choice as to how this is interpreted. And therefore, is democracy to die in darkness under Trump? If so, the very essence of the meaning dies with it. As if the media are silenced, then the freedom and choice die with it. And if a man ceases to be able to choose, he ceases to be a man.
Six years into the deadly conflict in Syria, pressure is building for a political solution to the crisis. But prospects for a comprehensive peace remain bleak as the West and some of its regional allies continue harboring and supporting terrorist groups in the country. Israel, which occupied Syria's Golan Heights in 1981, is widely believed to be among the backers of terrorists in the war-torn country.
I think it's very reasonable to believe, however, that Israeli intelligence is active on the ground in Syria because, if nothing else, because of, number one, the Israeli attacks on certain targets in Syria, which included the killing of Syrian senior military officers, which included killing senior Hezbollah military officers.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has at times voiced support for anti-Syrian government militants. In 2014, he even paid a visit to a field hospital established in the occupied Golan Heights to treat wounded militants. Despite various media reports about Israel's support for anti-Damascus terrorists, Tel Aviv has been denying collaboration with such groups. On Friday, the former Israeli Minister of Military Affairs, Moshe Ya'alon, put an end to Tel Aviv's denial of collaboration with anti-Damascus terrorists. He was quoted as telling militants near the occupied Golan Heights that Israel would take care of their needs.
We've known for a long time that the Israelis are coordinating with the Al-Qaeda terrorists in the Golan Heights in Syria. And for the last 6 years now, the Israeli government has been acting as the medical corps for those terrorists located in the Golan Heights. They go back and forth when they're wounded in the fight for regime change in Syria. They're carried across the border into Israel for medical care. This has been documented many times by the UN observers who sit on the border and have been there for 40 or 50 years now. In fact, the Israelis make no point about hiding this collaboration with the terrorists in Syria because Prime Minister Netanyahu has had himself videotaped and photographed in the hospitals next to the bedsides of these terrorists who are in the pay of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other governments who are part of the US-led coalition for regime change in Syria.
Ya'alon in return urged the militants to protect Israeli-occupied territories. Those areas in Syria are mainly seized by Jabhat Fatah al-Sham terror group, formerly known as the Al-Nusra Front. This is the first time that a senior Israeli official has confessed that the regime has been cooperating with terrorists in Syria. Moshe Ya'alon's comments raised the question as to what Israel's main goals are in Syria. In February 2016, during the Munich Security Conference, Ya'alon cast doubt on peace efforts in Syria, expressing support for a Syria partition. These are his words. Part of any grand strategy is to avoid the past, saying that we are going to unify Syria. We know how to make an omelet from an egg. I don't know how to make an egg from an omelet.
This has been going on a long time, and senior Israeli government officials have said many times that they would prefer to see ISIS, or the terrorists, in control in Damascus than Bashar al-Assad. So all this has been going on for 6 years, and now if a senior Israeli military officer finally admits that there's coordination, he's just admitting the obvious. And the obvious is that this war for regime change in Syria has been coordinated between the United States, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey, Jordan, and NATO to benefit the American foreign policy and to benefit Israel's interests in the Middle East, which include the destruction of the Syrian state.
The idea of a divided Syria has also been backed by American officials as a plan B for the war-torn country, should peace efforts fail to bear fruit. Undoubtedly, a sovereign Syria puts a major obstacle in the way of the US and Israel trying to fulfill their hegemonic goals in the Middle East.
The Saudi foreign minister on a surprise visit to Iraq. Adel al-Jubair's trip to Baghdad has been described as rare given the years-long tensions between the two countries. Jubair was heading a high-ranking delegation during talks with top officials including Iraqi Prime Minister Haydar al-Ebadi and Foreign Minister Ibrahim al-Jafari. The Saudi delegation's visit to Iraq has raised many questions about the kingdom's motive. Riyadh and Baghdad have been enemies since the overthrow of the former Iraqi regime of Saddam Hussein. The mounting tensions between them have been blamed on Saudi Arabia's, quote, support for militant groups ravaging Iraq with the aim of destabilizing it. Iraq has instead enjoyed cordial relations with Iran, which also sees the Saudis as a threat to regional stability.
It is only inevitable that both countries would seek to build a more cordial relationship between themselves. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be close friends. I don't believe that will happen. Saudi Arabia knows one thing, and that is money. That is the petrodollars. And yes, there is a possibility that Saudi Arabia is trying to buy Iraq, if we can put it into a colloquial way, trying to buy Iraq and in doing so pull Iraq away from Iran, also try and pull Iraq away from Syria.
There is another theory which asserts that the Middle East is heading towards compromise, and Saudi Arabia believes that Iraq is a key player. It appears Riyadh wants to have Baghdad on its side. Now the question is whether what is called Iraq's neutrality can make it a ground to help normalize ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Apart from Saudi Arabia's motive, Riyadh's image among Iraqi people and officials has long been tarnished. The Saudi regime stands accused of funding terror groups like Al-Qaeda and Daesh, ravaging Iraq following Saddam's overthrow in 2003. The Iraqi government also expelled the Saudi ambassador to Baghdad last year for his meddling comment.
I wouldn't say that what we're seeing in the Middle East at the moment is evidence of compromise between the leading players in the Middle East. I wouldn't say that. On the contrary, I would say that the Middle East is at its most volatile at present. And I believe that Iraq, yes, it wants to have cordial relations with all of its neighbours, and that is only natural, and we should support that. But at the end of the day, Iraq knows who its genuine friends and allies are in the region, and that is not Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia considers Iran as an obstacle in the way of Riyadh's policies in the Middle East. The Arab country, along with the Israeli regime, has spearheaded a campaign in the region and beyond to portray Iran as a threat to peace. In what many have described as shameful remarks by the Saudis given their long track record of supporting Takfiri terror groups, the kingdom has labeled the Islamic Republic of Iran a sponsor of terrorism. When tensions reached their boiling point, some observers even believed that the two countries were headed for a military confrontation. They predicted that such a war would spell disaster for the Saudi regime, given Iran's long battlefield experience and Saudi Arabia's weakness in this regard. Saudi Arabia is a close ally of the US, but it's widely believed that a war between Riyadh and Tehran is the last thing Washington wants, as the kingdom will definitely be the loser in such a military showdown, and their American allies cannot afford to intervene in such a conflict.